Namaste. Hi, everybody. So I can't be with you here tonight for chanting. So I arranged to show this great movie made by a friend of ours, Mickey Lemle. It's called Fierce Grace, and it's an incredible story about Ramdas recovering from his stroke, and it's such a beautiful experience. So very wonderful thing to watch. So that's why I arranged for you to see it today. And it'll only be available as it's shown. It won't be on the replay. So, and then afterwards, Mickey himself will come and doing a Q&A with you. So you can ask him all the questions about making the film and asking about Ramdas and all those things. He's known Ramdas also a long time. And that Q&A will be moderated by Nina. And you put your questions up on the chat. And that's the deal. So I hope to see you soon. And Ram Ram. Take good care.
Ram Ram. Namaste, everyone. Thank you for hanging in there in the heart space with all of us all these months. We're happy to continue our Thursday night satsangs with all of you. I have with me here, Mickey Lemle, the director of the film Fierce Grace, Ramdas, that we'll be watching tonight. And he's going to start with a few words about the film. And then, like Krishna said in the introduction, we would love for you to stay after the film so that you can ask questions and we can have a lively discussion with Mickey. Go ahead, Mickey.
I just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in tonight to see the film. It's always a pleasure to share it. Usually one screens a movie or shows a movie. In this case, I feel more like it's an offering from my heart to your hearts. So thank you for tuning in tonight, and I'll see you after.
Welcome back, everyone. Honestly, Mickey, I've seen this film, I think countless times since I think I was at the premiere back in 2001, maybe, when you did it in New York City. And each time there's just another deeper moment each time. It's incredible. How did it feel for you to watch it?
It was great to see again. Yeah. You know, I love this movie, and I was just really moved.
Yeah.
You know, I'm so glad that we captured him at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking that, you know, there have been other films after this one about Ramdas, and then his book, you know, the memoir, Being Ramdas. But somehow you captured this pivotal time when his sadhana took a turn in a particular way based on the way in which he dealt with this stroke. But let's go back for just a second. For those of you who are joining a little late, we actually just finished watching Ramdas' Fierce Grace. And we have with us today Mickey Lemle, who's the filmmaker. And Mickey's been making films since he was 19 years old. And he's made films on various people and topics, including feature films, TV series, as well as documentaries that include 2 films on His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So we have some questions from the audience, and I wanted to just... while I'm looking at the questions, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction as to how you met Ramdas and how you came to make this film about him?
Well, I first met Ramdas in the 70s. I was on Martha's Vineyard visiting friends, and this friend of mine said to me, hey, you really have to go hear this guy tonight. He's speaking at a church in Vineyard Haven. And I said, who is it? And he said, his name's Ramdas. And I said, oh, is he Indian? He said, no, he's Jewish. And I said, oh, I'm supposed to go to a church and listen to a Jewish guy with an Indian name? I don't think so. So he said, no, you have to go hear him. So he was so insistent that I went, but I sat in the last row on the aisle. And I figured, maybe I'd spend 15 minutes and then I could, go and do something important. Excuse my dog. And so I went, and 4 hours later, I hadn't moved. I was totally transfixed. My mind never wandered to the past or the future or anything I could have been doing. I was just transfixed by his stories. And I decided right then and there that anytime he was speaking in a city where I would go hear him. And he had this way of going from the very personal stories about his own failures on his spiritual journey to these metaphysical levels that I'd read about in college, but I never quite understood. But somehow when he told stories about it, wrapped in his personal experience, I was getting it. I was like understanding these esoteric things. And the essence of what he said that night was, he said, we're both human and divine simultaneously. And the art form is to dance in the tension between the two. Mm-hmm. Because if you go too far in the direction of just being human, you run, as our Tibetan Buddhist friends tell us, life in an incarnation is suffering. You're just going to suffer. And if you go too far in the direction of your divinity, you run the risk of forgetting your zip code, and that can be problematic at times. So the art form, as I said, was to dance in the tension between the two. And the form and the content of his talk was absolutely in sync. And so then I started going to his talks, and then weekend workshops and week-long workshops, and over the years we became friends. In 1992, 1992, I had just finished my first movie about the Dalai Lama called Compassion in Exile. And I was invited to show it at this big international conference in Prague. And Ramdas was one of the speakers. And it was one of the first times I showed the movie. And he sat right in the front row in the middle. And after the screening, he came up to me after and he said, "Listen, I loved your movie. I want you to bring it to my next workshop. I want you to talk about it, And I said, "Okay, Ramdas, but you're next." And he said, "No, I'm not ready. I'm not ready." And then a few years later, there was another conference in Manaus in Brazil, in the middle of the rainforest, and he was one of the speakers. And I had just finished the movie about Sir Lawrence Vanderpost called Hasten Slowly, which I showed. And after it, he came up to me and he said, I loved your movie. I need a copy to give to Lawrence Rockefeller, and I need you to come and show it at my next retreat. And I said, "Okay, Baba, but you're next." And he said, No, I'm not ready, not ready. And then a couple of weeks later, I got a letter from him saying, "Someday somebody will make a movie about me, and it should be you. But I'm just not ready now because I'm in a transition." And as a filmmaker, as all filmmakers know, the real art form to making films is how do you structure the story? It's like an architect knows how a building actually is standing and how the roof stays up. And so in my mind, I knew the structure of the film that I wanted to make about him. By that time, I knew almost all of his stories by heart. I'd listened to all of his tapes, so I knew which stories I wanted, and then how I would string them together in a structure. And then he had the stroke, and he could barely get a sentence together when he first got out of the hospital. And after 2 months in the hospital, I went to visit him in Marin, and we spent the afternoon together. I was sitting on his porch. We were just watching the birds, and and a lot of silence. And at the end of the afternoon, I said to him, "RD, maybe it's time we made this movie." And he said, "Okay."
Oh.
And so when I got back to New York, I wanted to make sure that he knew what he had agreed to. So I wrote him a letter saying, RD, I think this is what we agreed to, but I just want to double check. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So that first afternoon on the porch, one of the things he said to me, he pointed to himself with his left hand, which still worked, and he said, this isn't who I thought I was going to be, because my vision of myself old didn't have a stroke in it. And he said, if I think about who I was supposed to be, or I think about who I used to be, I just suffer. But if I just rest in awareness, I'm in bliss. And in a weird way, that mirrored my artistic process that I had to go through, which was to let go completely of this movie that I'd been carrying around in my head for 8 years. Because, I think the first day we did an interview, it took him like 18 minutes to tell one of his stories, because there were so many pauses and going home that night just to depress myself, I figured if I cut all the pauses together from that day of shooting, I probably had an hour and a half, which, cost thousands of dollars. And so he couldn't do that movie, but I figured we would just see what was right in front of us every day. And the movie that I wanted to make was going to be, I think, very powerful, but it was nothing compared to this.
Yeah. I remember, the scene from the film where he's being wheeled into St. John the Divine, into Synod Hall. So that was, I think that was his first public event in maybe everywhere, or maybe just in New York. I'm not sure.
I think it was his first public event.
Yeah.
Where he spoke. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was the first event that I ever planned for Krishna Das. I remember that so well. And I had never met Ramdas before. And so Krishnadas told me he'd had a stroke, and, it was upsetting, of course, to him. And then this event was being planned. And my memory of the evening was how much was transmitted in the silence. And that's from me not having ever attended a Ramdas lecture. I had very quickly read Be Here Now just to, understand who Ramdas is. And, but it was so potent to be in that space, and then to, and most of the time he didn't actually speak. You got a clip of it there. Yeah.
Well, he started to speak essence, and as opposed to narrative. Yeah. He's one of the three greatest storytellers I've ever met in my life. He could just hold your attention with his stories, and after the stroke, he couldn't do it. He couldn't do the stories, but he was speaking essence. It was like poetry as opposed to prose.
Right. When you first saw him in the 70s, he might have had returned already from being with Maharaji. Did he talk about Maharaji in those days?
Oh yes, all the time.
Directly, yeah. Yeah.
And it was like he had light coming from him. He was luminous.
Yeah.
I saw him in New York on stage when it was like he was light. He was just shining Maharaji's grace,
Did you understand at that time that what you were experiencing was, of course, Ramdas and the strength of his practice, but also Maharaji was, shining through him? Did you feel that at that time? Did you? Yeah.
Yes, most definitely. When he would do a Q&A with the audience, almost always after there was a question, he would just take a moment, close his eyes, and breathe. And I think he was listening for what Maharaji was saying, that's what it felt like anyway.
Right. So let me just bring a couple of questions from the viewers who've been watching the film. Somebody asked, over what period of time was the film made? Because you have obviously some archival footage, but then you've also you've filmed in India and some of Ramdas's live events. Can you tell us that process for you?
I don't remember exactly how long, but when he agreed to do the film, he was going to go to the Taoist temple. This was a few months after the stroke. It was going to be the first time he left the Bay Area. And I figured, at that point, he'd been through the ringer. I mean, the stroke was really brutal. The first 2 months, he was in the hospital. He had tubes going in and out. He couldn't speak. He couldn't swallow. He couldn't talk. He was really just on the edge of death. And the doctors, in their inimitable way, said, he's either going to die or be a vegetable. He's never going to make any improvement from this. Mm-hmm. And then one day, this friend of mine, a mutual friend, was visiting him, and he said he wants to live. And I believe, I never asked him, but I believe he decided to come back and tell the rest of us what is in our future and a way to deal with it. And that the kind of stroke that he was paralyzed on his right side, had speech aphasia. The average life expectancy for somebody with that kind of stroke is 3 to 5 years max. My uncle had the exact same stroke, and I think he lived for just under 3 years. And Ramdas lived for 22 years after it. And when I was with him a few months before he died, I said, RD, if Guinness kept track of this stuff, you would have the world's record for surviving with a stroke like that, because it wasn't fun. I mean, it was, he needed help to turn over. He needed help to go to the bathroom. He needed help to wash and brush his teeth. And, it was very indignant in a lot of ways. And I don't know, I think all the time when I was with him, I think, could I stand that, and he just kept doing it. He said, it's a whole new, he said, I thought I understood life. And all of a sudden there's this whole new teaching, So.
I mean, that's incredible. I mean, that was really the stroke of grace, as far as I can tell, was his ability to use the experience of the stroke to progress in his sadhana and to share that with us. Like Wavy said, Ramdas, you always go ahead and you come back and bring back the teachings to us. So you go ahead and do the same thing again, which I thought was really important to hear.
Well, Krishna said to him a few months before he died, he turned and said, RD, you finally become the person that we all thought you were 20 years ago.
Yeah. He says that a lot.
He really did. He became loving awareness.
Yeah, he did. I felt that too in the time that I knew him, which was, I met him at that event, which I think was in, he had the stroke in 1997, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I think the event was in 1998, if I remember.
Which event?
The event in St. John the
Divine?
Yeah, I think that was in 98 maybe, or 97 late. I can't remember for sure.
No, I don't remember now.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, so what happened was, I didn't when we started, when he said let's do the movie, I didn't know how long he was going to live, because he was really fragile.
Yeah.
And so I was able to raise $10,000, and I got a crew together, and we went to Taos and filmed, and came back, and I tried to raise some more money, and as soon as I'd raise enough money, we'd go and shoot for a weekend and come back, and this took place over a couple of years. Then I had to keep raising money, and as soon as I got enough to do a shoot, we went and filmed with him. So nobody knows this, but the interviews with him is maybe 7 or 8 or 9 different times over the course of 2 years. And we took pictures of what he was wearing. We took pictures of the lighting setup and what was in the background. And he wasn't allowed to wear that sweater except for filming, so he didn't get soup on it. And we matched it so that it at least looked the same. And then after we got done editing, this is now two and a half years, maybe after we started the project. Sometimes I like to go back and just get one or two things. If there's like a little hole in the structure, and I figured if I could ask him about this thing, it could, make the continuity better. So I called him up. I said, RD, I want to come back and do a half a day shoot, just to pick up some stuff. And he said, well, there's a problem. I said, what's that? He said, we don't live in the house anymore. The landlord took it back. Yeah. And I said, oh no. So I called the landlord and I said, look, I want to rent your living room for an afternoon. And his wife's on the phone saying, ask for a lot of money, in the background. Ask for a lot of money. These Hollywood people, And so we negotiated for an afternoon of filming, and we brought back the speaker and the Buddha and the plant in the background and matched it. And nobody in all these years has ever noticed.
Thank you for sharing that secret.
Moving magic. I hope I didn't destroy the experience for anybody. Yeah. I just want to acknowledge Linda Maroney, who was the associate producer on the project, actually sat and watched the movie with us. And I just want to acknowledge how the movie couldn't have gotten done without her. She was just an integral part of that and all my movies since. So bless her heart.
Hi, Linda. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I remember Linda well. So one of the questions people ask is, could you please share the letter that's in the very beginning of the film that Ramdas wrote for Rachel? And I just want to say to everybody, if you Google Ramdas letter to Rachel, even though it is not a letter to Rachel, if you do that, if you put that in your Google search, it actually shows up on the Ramdas website, and you can actually read the full letter again.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. It's
when the movie was broadcast, we would get calls every week. People wanting it. We had it on our computer and just sent it out, and several people told me that this one woman came up to me after a screening and said, I lost my 18-year-old daughter a year and a half ago, and the only thing that got me through was watching this movie every day. And there were several people told me that, and told Ramdas that too. It's an amazing letter, and the backstory, which in my movies, like this movie didn't have a narrator. Yeah. So if the people didn't share something, I couldn't, give the information. But he didn't really know them very well. He was at Lama Foundation, and a friend of the Isers showed him an article in the paper saying, these people are really hurting, and they've read your books. Is there anything you can say to them? And he said, I knew that if I didn't sit down at that moment and write it, I would never get to it. Uh-huh. And he sat down and just wrote that letter. And it's just astounding. I cry every time I've seen the movie, well over 1,000 times. And I was crying tonight. It's just so moving.
Same. It's like an eternal truth that he was able to speak at that moment. And it resonates. Yeah. One of the things, few people have asked this question, what did you learn yourself? And whatever, that could be about Ramdas or any internal epiphanies you might have had in the making of this film. How did it change you?
Great question. All of my movies, I can see how my worldview shifts when, after spending a few years with the Dalai Lama or with Joseph Campbell or with Lawrence Vanderpost, and I can see how my worldview shifts. With Ramdas, in a way, the movie has it could look like it has chapters, like his childhood, professor, psychedelics, Maharaji, service, and then stroke. But really, the through line in all of that is the fact that our minds create our reality. Mm-hmm. And that's the main thing I got from this movie, is that your reality, you create your reality in your mind. And the Buddhists tell us that that's where suffering comes from. It's in a way it's in your mind, how you deal with it.
Yeah.
Stuff happens, but it's how you deal with it is where the suffering comes from.
Yeah, I'm sure His Holiness has also spoken about this when you've interviewed him and filmed him for his films as well. Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. And the main thing I got from the first when I did the first movie in 90 to 92, I guess, I got that that happiness comes from serving. That real happiness comes from serving others, and it was a departure from Look Out for Numero Uno, which was my worldview before that, and so that was very valuable.
Yeah. There's a note here from a dear friend of ours, Linda. She says, "Thank you, Mickey, for this wonderful film. Ramdas, my greatest teacher, saved my life. My son Ethan was so inspired by RD when he was going through brain cancer. RD taught him how to do his death journey and was buried with Maharaji blanket, under Maharaji's blanket. I would not have been able to get through this. The letter was the first thing I remembered in my grieving, and it helped immensely." So that's Linda saying that. So Diane has an interesting question. She says, "Is this movie better than the one you had planned to make before Ramdas's stroke?"
Oh, way better, way better.
Yeah. Some people are asking how it is that some people weren't able to join in the beginning or want to watch the film again. So you want to tell us where they can watch this film?
You can download or stream all of my movies from my website, which is lemlepictures.com. That Lemle is Lemle pictures.com.
Okay, I'll ask. We can share that in the chat. Hold on just a second. I can do that right here.
I apologize for my dog. She's barking at some deer or wild turkeys in the yard.
Right. I'm also going to post a link to the letter from Ramdas, which I have here.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, that's also here. So this is a question from Brian. How can we use our artistic gifts as a spiritual offering?
I guess, as the Tibetan Buddhists say, it's really what's your motivation. When I pitched the first Dalai Lama movie to His Holiness, I sat across from him and basically pitched the movie, telling him how I saw it and what I wanted to do with it. And at the end of it, he looked at me and said, "Do you think this is a worthwhile undertaking?" And I said, "Your Holiness, if I didn't think it was a worthwhile undertaking, I wouldn't spend my time doing it." And he just looked at me with those wonderful eyes and said, "That's a very American way of looking at it." He just cracked up. And in years after, having spent a lot of time with Tibetan Buddhists, what I learned was that to a Tibetan Buddhist, the most important aspect of any action that you take is what's your motivation. Mm-hmm. So the Dalai Lama said to me once, he said, "If you go on a peace march and you have anger in your heart, stay home. Mm-hmm. The only way to go on a peace march is with peace in your heart." So really what he was asking me at that moment was, what was my motivation for making the movie? Mm-hmm. I missed it completely, took it into my Western ego and answered from there. Yeah. But luckily he is the world's most compassionate person, and he had compassion on my ignorance, and he said, "Okay, let's do the movie, but let's do it soon."
So what would be your answer now?
So my answer to, was it Brian who asked the question?
Yes, Brian.
Brian, it's like, check your motivation. What's your motivation for doing whatever the art is?
Yeah. There was a kind of a more detailed question here about, hang on a second, let me find it. Oh, yes. The question is, was it love towards Neem Karoli Baba for you, Mickey? This question is to you. Was it love towards Neem Karoli Baba or the inspiring, transformative journey of Ramdas that caused you to make this film?
I don't know if you can separate the two.
Yeah.
But you know, my way to Maharaji was through Ramdas. I mean, it was Ramdas. He was, in a way, one of my most important teachers, one of my first and important teachers. Mm-hmm. There were others before, but nothing like him. And you know, I was hanging out with him in Maui. I would visit him quite often. My mom was living on the Big Island of Hawaii, so anytime I would visit her, I'd fly over to Maui and see him, and we would, you know, just hang out together. And we were talking about his death at one time, and he said, "Well, you know, I think my guru Maharaji is going to be there to you know, to greet me," and you know, he said that's what your guru does. And I said, well, you realize that all of us are going to be looking for you when we cross over. You know, he hadn't thought that through. You know, he's going, oh no, you know. But anyway.
So maybe I'll close with this last question here, which is, what is your fondest memory of Ramdas?
Well, the one that comes to mind is I was visiting him. This is years after Fierce Grace came out. And I was visiting him on Maui and staying at his house. And one day he said to me, listen, there's this little fundraiser for the local Buddhist group. They're having a luncheon at the local Indian restaurant, and you know, you should come along. I said, sure. So we go and have nice Indian dinner and lunch, and then he was to speak. That was, you know, he was the guest speaker. So they wheel him up to this little rise, and he says, you know, I love the ceiling, and I love the walls, and I love the carpet, and I love all of you. And that was, you know, I've become loving awareness. So that was the gist of it. And then they wheel him, you know, and they wheel him next to me, and he kind of looks to me like, what'd you think? And I went, you know, and he was like deeply offended. It's like, and so when we got back to his house, I said, RD, you love the carpet as much as you love me, you know? And he said, yeah, I'm loving awareness. And I said, so you would exchange those pictures of Maharaji on the wall for some of the piece of that carpet, you know? And he said, you know, it doesn't matter. And I said, you know, what about a Van Gogh? And he said, it doesn't matter. And, you know, so then it was his 80th birthday. And there was a big party for him actually the day after his birthday. But the day before, there's like, I think 10 of us that met at his house for his actual birthday. And I came, I had this big, beautifully wrapped box with, you know, paper and ribbons and stuff. And I said to him, RD, you know, I tried to figure out what could I possibly get you, you know? So I thought I would get you something that would put you in touch with the fact that you are loving awareness. And, you know, he opens the box and takes out this piece of curry-stained carpet, you know, with schmutz all over it. And it was just really gross. And I said, the Indian restaurant was doing a renovation, and I was able to get a piece of the carpet, you know, and everybody laughed and thought it was great. Well, the next time I went to visit him, it was hanging on the wall with a kata, a Tibetan scarf over it, and in the living room, and he loved it. He absolutely loved it, and I love it too. I just think it's my favorite story with him.
It's definitely one of his favorites. I've heard him tell that story a few times, actually, in Maui himself. He loved that whole exchange. So I have two more questions before we close, because I know we're running over. One is a quick one, which is, how did you come up with the name, or who came up with the name Fierce Grace for this film?
Well, originally, the working title for the movie was Ramdas Being Here Now.
Mhm.
And one night I was at a lecture at the New York Historical Society, and there was a little reception afterwards. And I was talking to this woman, and she said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm making this movie about Ramdas." And she said, "I always loved Ramdas." She said, "But I never really totally believed any of the things, his teachings. I didn't quite believe it until I saw how he was dealing with the stroke. And now it's like validated all of the stories that he would tell." And I went home that night and I thought, this man has been teaching in some form or other for 50 years. And for the way he's dealing with the stroke to validate all of his teachings, it really is grace. And then he had said fierce grace a few times he saw in the movie.
Right.
So I decided I went in the next day and said to Linda, the name of the movie is now Fierce Grace, and she loved it, and that's how it got its name.
Great. So thank you so much for showcasing this inspiration for us that we can watch over and over again. And for those of you who would like to watch the film again or ask other people to watch it, remember it's on lemlepictures.com. And also, Mickey, do you have any current project that you're working on?
Yeah, I was supposed to shoot a movie in Japan, dramatize a wonderful story that Ramdas used to tell at a lot of his talks, and actually is in his book, How Can I Help, about one of the first Westerners to learn Aikido. And I had it all set up to shoot in April of 2020. And then in January, when COVID started to become a real, thing, luckily I know Larry Brilliant, who's an epidemiologist who helped eradicate smallpox. So I called him and I said, "Larry, I'm supposed to shoot this movie in Japan in April. Would I be prudent to put it off till September?" He said, "Extremely prudent." So then, Japan is still, it's only 15% vaccinated. I had it all set up. I mean, I had the crew, I'd done casting in Japan, and we were all set to go. So that's on hold. I'm hoping to shoot it probably next spring. If we can all travel again. So in the meanwhile, I wrote one book, which is advice to young filmmakers, and I'm working on another book, which is it's like a memoir of all stories about all these incredible beings I've been blessed to be able to get close to in the process of filming. I mean, not only have I been able to spend time with people like Ramdas and the Dalai Lama and Joseph Campbell and people like that, but when I'm editing, I'm seeing them on an editing machine for 9 months and listening to them talk about things that the same things that keep me awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling. They're talking about, and that's my day job, is to think about and meditate on the deepest issues of my life. And so I'm really blessed in that way. So I've written this. I'm writing a memoir about some of those experiences, and and ex-wives, things like that.
Okay, well, we look forward to receiving that when it is released. Thank you so much for being here, Mickey, and for helping us screen this film tonight when Krishnas couldn't be with us. And I look forward to seeing you again sometime very soon.
I look forward to that. And I want to thank everybody for taking their time to share this movie this evening.
Very nice. Thank you all for joining us this evening. And we'll see you next Thursday. Ram Ram, Sita Ram. Thank you so much.